Now we get to move on to a very important topic, the importance of counting and claiming meals. So federal and state dollars are provided in reimbursement for each meal claimed for reimbursement. So you're receiving, your school, SFA, is receiving not only federal but state dollars for the meals that you are providing your students. The amount of reimbursement per meal varies by category. So once again, there's a different rate of reimbursement for free, reduced price, and paid. And you are eligible to claim one meal per student per day. So one meal type. So one breakfast, one lunch. If you participate in both breakfast and lunch, you can claim one breakfast, one lunch. If you participate in the after school care snack program, one snack, but you have to meet the requirements of counting and claiming those meals. So we're going to move on to the next slide. In order to get that reimbursement, these meals must meet meal pattern requirements. And that entails making sure that the specific food components for the required grade group portion sizes are being planned and served, and that they are documented. Okay, so that compliance piece, we've got to have that documentation that meal pattern requirements have been met, and that is through a record called a production record, which is just documentation of what the menu is, the portion size served, and the actual amount of food that is prepared and left over for meal service, each meal service. The meals must be served to enrolled students. So students enrolled in your school, they have to be counted as the student leaves the line with the reimbursable meal. So after they have been offered all food components and they have received the reimbursable meal is when that meal can be counted. An accurate point of service meal count is required. So it can't be done before that student has been offered that food and has selected the requirements of that program. Daily meal counts must be accurately combined to equal a total for the month for each meal type. So a daily meal count is required. Daily meal count by eligibility category, paid, free, reduced, must be accurately combined to equal a total for the month for each meal type. So a total for all of the breakfast served for paid, free, reduced students, a total for lunch, paid, free, and reduced for each day of the month. And if you participate in the after school care snack program, then we're going to need that total number of snacks that have been served. So I can't overemphasize the importance of an accurate counting system. As we move to the next slide, the most important person, during an administrative review is that person that is determining that meal is eligible for reimbursement, because they are, one, verifying that student is present in the line and that they have the reimbursable meal. And so can't overemphasize the importance of cashiers and those individuals that conduct your POS or your point of service meal count. I don't sometimes think they realize how important they are and how important their responsibility is in ensuring that, yes, the school is entitled to that federal reimbursement. So these individuals must know the offer versus serve requirements. And that is a serving option that most schools or almost all schools in Nebraska utilize. It's where a student must be offered all of the 5 required food components in the required portion sizes, but it does allow students to turn down food items if they have no intention on eating those food items. The requirement is students must select 3 out of the 5 food components at lunch at a minimum. And one of those items must be a half a cup of fruit and or vegetable to equal a reimbursable meal. So that's an option that offer versus serve is an option. Schools can choose for elementary and middle school grades. It's a requirement for high school grade students, 9 through 12, that they have offer versus serve as an option. For the lower grades, it's optional, but if a school chooses not to do offer versus serve, then all food components in the required serving size need to be on that student's tray. And that can result in quite a bit of plate waste if a student has no intention of eating something. So the importance of a cashier, POS, that count can't be taken till after all food components have been offered to the student. So it can't take place at the beginning of the line. It can't be completed for a morning count. It has to actually be taken as that student is present with that reimbursable meal. Offer versus serve is optional for all grade groups at breakfast, but most schools implement offer versus serve at breakfast. Once again, meeting the requirements isn't difficult, and students like to pick and choose. As long as they have that half a cup of fruit and vegetable on their tray and 2 other items on their tray at breakfast, then that constitutes a reimbursable meal. So let's go down to the next slide. Communication is key. That your food service directors have been trained in OVS. That is the training that we are conducting this summer for our school meals training. And they need to be able to share that information with those individuals that are responsible for being cashiers or point of service, if that is someone other than food service staff that is running your registers and counting your students, conducting your point of service. Then everyone needs to be communicating about what the requirements are, so that we can ensure that everyone is trained on what they need to be looking at as students take that reimbursable meal. And on our website, under Forms and Resources, under the food service section, we have a whole area about offer versus serve requirements. There's a manual from USDA. We have a handout that's available that explains offer versus serve. And then we also have a sample letter to parents, because parents need to be educated that the school is utilizing offer versus serve and what the requirements are, so that they are in the know of how the program operates. And if we move down to the next slide, we have additional resources. As I said, there is a manual from USDA that explains offer versus serve. Our handout, we have another handout that explains it pretty simply for our point of service folks. So very important that those individuals understand how important they are. And that means that they need to be located and looking at student trays. Oftentimes I hear, well, the POS person is sitting at maybe a table in the lunchroom and they're just glancing over as students walk by. They're not actually looking at student trays. And that is a requirement, that they are not only, one, making sure that student is present, but that tray contains the required food components for reimbursement. So very important that they understand the role that they play in ensuring that the federal dollars your school is receiving are justified by ensuring students have reimbursable meals. So then we're going to go down to the next slide. Counting meals. We have additional information about the importance of counting meals, where that count needs to happen at. As I mentioned, you can't do a tray count. You can't do a morning count. It has to be actually after the student is present with that reimbursable meal. So after all food components have been offered to the student. So if anything is being offered after the POS, like your fruit and vegetable bar, those are food components, then that person needs to be moved so that the student has access to all food components before the meal is counted. And this is a good handout that explains that. And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about with counting meals. We look at this very in depth when we do administrative review to ensure that schools are in compliance. Okay. We're going to move on to the next slide. Your options if you're using a software system or a roster. Many schools do a computerized software system for their accurate meal count, where student eligibility is entered into the software, and then the point of service is conducted in the lunchroom. When the student comes, then they're marked, and immediately then we have a count for whatever their eligibility is for that day or for that meal. Some examples of software systems include Power School, Power Lunch, Wordware, Infinite Campus, Sycamore. Those are all examples. Every software system is a little unique. It is the school's responsibility to ensure whatever software system they are using provides an accurate count. An alternate option for some of our smaller schools is that maybe they don't utilize a software system, but they use a roster checkoff system where students are actually marked off on a roster as they leave the serving line that they have the reimbursable meal. Both, again, are done at the end of the serving line. So after all food components have been offered to the student. The next slide is, now that we've talked a lot about counting and meals and the importance of counting meals by student eligibility, that software systems do that with manual systems, then it is really a coding issue for the individual that does the daily meal count of paid, free, and reduced, and knowing what that student's eligibility is. It should not be marked on the roster because that could be considered overt identification. So if all of your free students are highlighted in yellow and your reduced are highlighted in green, that's overt identification where someone could actually know a student's eligibility. So we want to avoid anything like that. We are required not to identify a student's eligibility. So once the daily count has been completed with the number of free, reduced, and paid students, then we have a daily count for the day. The numbers are entered into a monthly form, either manually or if you have a software system, then that is probably generated for you with the software system. And you can utilize the Edit Check worksheet that we have available on the Nutrition Services website. Or, as I said, if your software system does it, then you have your report. The Edit Check worksheet is found under Forms and Resources, Meal Counts and Claims, and it is called Attachment J. It is a printable PDF form. There's also an Excel spreadsheet. This is a form that we frequently see when we're out at schools. The form is completed for each day of the month with the daily counts recorded for each category. The total of free, reduced, and paid meals for the month is then recorded in the corresponding total at the bottom of the column. The form can also be used for tracking adult meals, which must be recorded even though they cannot be claimed for reimbursement. So as we can see, we have a count for breakfast, lunch, special meal, and then you can certainly utilize a column for the adult meals. If your software system provides the daily count of meals by category and compiles the totals for the month, then you can just print that report, because that is the report you're going to be using for your claim of reimbursement, or you'll be using this form, Attachment J, for completing the claim for reimbursement. So let's move to the next slide. Attachment J, there is what is required from USDA called an edit check. And it is a check before you submit the claim for reimbursement that, one, you are not claiming more students than you have eligible by category. And then we are applying the attendance factor, the monthly attendance factor, to eligibility to determine if any daily lunch count exceeds that. So once again, it's a double check required by USDA to be completed. Now, if you are a manual system and using Attachment J, it's at the bottom of Attachment J. If you are a computerized system that's utilizing a software system, some generate the edit check and some do not. And you need to ensure that this piece is being completed no matter what. So if you have a software system that doesn't generate this, then you will be required to do it manually. So on the slide, we can see the bottom of Attachment J is the required edit check. This section is completed before submitting information for the claim in the CNP system. It is a double check of accuracy in claiming numbers. So let's look at A in the boxes that are kind of in the middle of the screen. A is number of serving days refers to the number of days in the month that meals were served for each meal type. So we are completing this for lunch, okay? So the number of days in the month that lunch meals were served. B is the SFA enrollment is the number of students that are enrolled in school that have access to meal service. Now, I want to say this is completed by feeding site. So if you are one feeding site, so you have only one cafeteria, kitchen, lunchroom, then you would complete one. If you are a school that has several different feeding sites, so perhaps you have a high school, a middle school, and an elementary, then you would complete this for each feeding site, because you are required to do a meal count by feeding site. So number B is the SFA enrollment is the number of students that are enrolled in the school or site, okay, the site that have access to meal service. So the enrollment by site. C is the average daily attendance must be calculated to determine the average number of students in school on any given day. So average daily attendance is the total of daily attendance for the month divided by the number of operating days in the month is how we determine average daily attendance. So it's important to note anytime you are calculating student numbers such as average daily attendance or average daily participation, you always must round up. As I said earlier, you can't have a part of a student. So you are required to round up. So for example, if our average is 102.25, we're going to round up to 103. Very important as you submit your claim for reimbursement to always ensure you're rounding up. Now, letters D, E, and F are for recording the highest number of students eligible for free or reduced meals in the month. So the highest number of free students I had in the month, the highest number of reduced students I had in the month, and the highest number of paid students I have in the month. So if a student would change categories during the month, so they start out the month in the free category, okay, and let's say we're at the 31st operating day of the school year, and they have not been determined, they're still on carryover, but on that 31st day, they haven't submitted an application, they've not appeared on my direct certification list, they go to paid, then they wouldn't be included in both the free eligibility and the paid eligibility. So they can be counted in two different eligibilities. So we determine that for D, E, and F, the highest number. And then let's move to G. The attendance factor is simply the average daily attendance divided by B, which is our enrollment. So that's our attendance factor. So for example, that could be 95%. 95% of your students are in attendance on any given day in the month. It could be 90%, you know, it kind of depends upon the time of the year. But typically, you know, probably anywhere from 92 to 99% of your students are going to be in attendance on any given day in the month. So we've determined that. And then we take that attendance factor and we times it by our highest number of free, reduced, and paid. So we've applied that attendance factor to each of the eligibility categories. And that is called the adjusted eligibility. So we're going to be looking at attendance adjusted eligibility as we look at the edit check, the daily counts. We're applying that adjusted attendance eligibility. So that's just saying that if we have 95% of our students in attendance on any given day, then that same would apply for the highest number of paid, the highest number of reduced, and the highest number of free students. So when we look at that, and if we have a count that would exceed that, so let's go to the next slide. Right here, I know this is pretty small to see, but at this school, our attendance factor was 96%, and we are multiplying it by the highest number in the category. So if we look at H, I, and J, we can see that on any given day, if I exceed 10 for my free category, if I exceed 29 for any reduced, and 50, I believe that should be 58. then I am going to tag that day. So for example, on the 20th, I can see that I had all of my students that were eligible for reduced eat that day. I also had 59 of my paid students eat that day. And if I exceeded 58, then I needed to tag that day. So that is just a double check. What happened that day? Why did so many students eat? And I have to indicate a reason for that. And perhaps it's that all students in those categories were in attendance that day. That can be a reason. Or I'm looking back at my menu and it looks like, oh, that's a favorite entree. Everybody's going to eat on that day. So I just have to indicate a reason. It's just a double check to make sure that my numbers are correct before I submit the claim for reimbursement. So this is a requirement that the edit check worksheet be completed by month for each feeding site. It's a double check system. So let's move. Allie, good news. You're going to be talking about submitting the claim for reimbursement.
Yes, thank you, Sean. And we're like in our final hour here, so I just want you all to know we're coming into our last section, so hang in there. I know it's been a lot of information and a long day, but we're wrapping up here at the end. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about submitting a claim for reimbursement. And this is submitting the monthly claim. And many of you are familiar with this process, but some of you may not be, so we're going to briefly review it. There will be a claim guide that is also sent out for school year 23-24. I don't believe it's ready yet, but once we have it ready, we will share it with you all in an update. And so that guide, just like the application guide that was sent yesterday from Katie, is really helpful when you're submitting your monthly claim, but you can also always reach out to a program specialist here at NDE Nutrition Services if you have any questions or need assistance. So as we look at the screen, we are again in that CNP system. We've talked a lot about that application tab up at the top in the dark blue. So now we're going to switch over to the claims tab. So this is where you're going to go to submit your monthly claim. And a reminder that claims that will be entered into this category will be National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, After School Care Program or After School Snack, and Special Milk Program. So we'll go ahead and click on claims, and then you go down. We're going to work in the S&P School Nutrition Program claims on the next slide. You'll see when you select that, then a list of your months come up, and you're going to select the month that you wish to submit the claim. So we've selected August in the green box. Then on the next slide, you can see that you will add an original claim. And when you do this, it prompts another screen below that will list your site. You've named these in your application, but on the screen we have site 1, 2, 4, and you'll add each claim for each site. So once you've clicked the site, you'll be prompted to another screen where you're going to enter the information. So you're going to enter the highest number of children approved for each category, and these will be in lines G1 through G4. And this is during the month, and you add this information to prevent any error on the claim. G5 will calculate in the system the total for you. So that will give you the attendance factor percentage. Then as we move down on the page, under there's a section for National School Lunch Program and a section for School Breakfast Program per site. So on L2 and N1, enter the average daily attendance. This is, again, is the total of daily attendance for the month divided by the number of days in that month. And like Sean mentioned, you always want to round up to a whole number. So you would never enter 102.25 days, but instead you would enter 103 days. And then the system calculates the total lunches and the total breakfasts served for you. If your site operates an after-school care program, snack, enter each piece of the claim information below in these screens. Different information will be requested depending on whether or not your site is non-area eligible or area eligible. And once you've entered the information, you always want to click Save at the bottom. You can see in the green box. And you'll go ahead and repeat these steps for each site that operated that month to submit the claim. And when you have all the sites' claim information entered, you'll click the red Continue button at the bottom. So if you're just one site that's K through 12, you would just have one entry. But in our example up there, this school was broke down into a high school and 2 different elementaries. So once you've done that, you will need to mark the certification box at the bottom of the page and then click Submit for payment in the red button. And once submitted, a confirmation page will display and you'll need to click Finished for the claim to be complete. It's important that you take all of these steps when you submit the claim. If you don't finish a step or click a button completely, your claim won't be complete. So as you can see on this page, when you go back out to that month view, the claim must be in an accepted status in order to be paid. So this is a lot of times we get a question, someone will call and they say, I've entered my claim and there's an error under the claim status. Or validate. It needs to say accepted. So that means that something wasn't completed, whether it's information wasn't entered or you didn't click on all those buttons that I just instructed you to. So that's why it's very important to use that claim guide when you're doing this for the first time, or even if it's just been since, school got out in the spring. It's always a great reminder because there's several steps to making sure that claim has been accepted. So once it's in the accepted, the claim is ready to be paid out. And you can also see on the right-hand side, once it's been processed and paid, then the claim status will say processed. So some important reminders that pertain to claims entered under any program. Claims can be submitted anytime after the final meal or snack of that month has been served for the claim month. Every month, reconcile claim payments with your bank statement. Make sure they're correct. Again, the claim status in the CMP system must show as accepted status to be processed for payment. If the claim status is shown as validated or pending, this means the claim has not been submitted for payment. And you need to return to the CMP system to complete the certification step required to submit the claim. A claim in accepted status can be modified, but will need to be resubmitted after changes have been made. If you click Modify after the claim has been accepted, the claim must be resubmitted even if no changes were made. So if you accidentally hit Modify, you were looking at it to make sure it got submitted and you accidentally hit Modify, then you would actually have to go back and resubmit the claim, even if you didn't change any information. Remember, the last date to submit a claim is 60 days following the month covered by the claim. So shown on the slide, if the claim is for the month of February, it must be submitted by April 29th. And you can go to our website. That's what's shown on the screen here. Under quick links, you can scroll down to claim due dates and payment date. And after selecting that, you'll find lots of helpful information under this section on submitting a claim. And then you can also find the chart on the last day to submit a claim. It will give you that full chart. This is just a reminder on the reimbursement rates. Sean did cover this earlier in the training. Meals are reimbursed by student eligibility, free, reduced, and paid. This chart is also available on our website, and I believe it's in your handout from earlier. I'm not going to go through each section, but it's just a reminder when you're receiving the reimbursement payment. This chart shows you the breakdown for the breakfast and the lunch program. And additionally, reimbursement is provided for those performance-based incentives. Those are paid when all meal pattern requirements regarding components are met, such as vegetable subgroups and whole grain rich requirements. Sean also talked about this reimbursement can be shut off if SFA is not in compliance with this part. And also an additional reimbursement is the state match funding for breakfast and lunch. And these are paid out separately once per year, typically in the spring. And it's 5 cents for each breakfast and approximately 2 cents for each lunch. Additionally, for reimbursement is also severe need breakfast. Again, Sean covered this earlier. But if a school is at least 40% of the lunches served to the students at the second preceding school year or at free and reduced rates for reimbursement, then you qualify for severe need breakfast. And for lunch, it's an additional 2 cent qualifying if at least 60% of the lunches served at the second preceding school year were at the free and reduced rate. Data used for this will be from school year 22-23. And with that, I am done with the claim information and reimbursement information.